Tony Curtis, with his piercing blue eyes and stunning good looks, captivated audiences just before Hollywood's golden age stars came on the scene. A large number of admirers eventually realized that Curtis had more going for him than just a pretty look. He was a gifted actor whose career lasted for 60 years and earned him membership in the exclusive 100 Films Club. Many admirers saw Curtis as the perfect example of a sweetheart who went on to become an icon. Curtis, though, had a terrifying, hidden side that not even his most devoted admirers were aware of. Also, the truth is told here. Just like 23-year-old Curtis, who arrived in Hollywood in 1948 completely unprepared for what California would bring him or what this new experience would demand of him, you undoubtedly can relate. He was born into abject poverty and a horrible childhood, but he knew he had to get out of there. You see, Curtis's parents were immigrants from the Jewish faith. His parents were low-class tailors, they knew only Hungarian and lived in the backroom after a long day of work. A later diagnosis of schizophrenia added to the family troubles that Curtis was already dealing with. Along with Curtis's youngest brother Robert's institutionalization due to the same mental condition, the family's predicament was already grave. This family's situation deteriorated further. Due to his own inability to comprehend English, Curtis had to put off starting school. His family could not afford to feed him and his brother Julius when they were 8 years old, so they were thrown in an orphanage for a month. After waiting 4 years, Curtis's brother Julius died in a car accident. A truck crashed into the youngster, killing him instantly. Curtis had given up hope, was completely alone, and had resolved to survive on his own. At the tender age of 12, Curtis became a member of a local gang known for its petty theft and chronic absenteeism. His life was this. And it seemed like there was no way out of the child's misery until a neighbor took a risk on him. This generous neighbor made sure that Curtis had a positive outlet for his pent-up aggression by sending him to a Boy Scout camp. Fortunately, the change of scenery and relocation were game changers. After returning from camp, Curtis had calmed down a bit. He could go to high school and acquire the fundamental knowledge that would set him up for success in life. But that wasn't all the school accomplished. Since Curtis landed his first little playing role when he was 16 years old, it paved the way for his acting career. He was cast as a complete dimwit in a drama set in a settlement house. Curtis shaved his head to prepare for the role and waited nearly 3 hours to go on stage, doing all in his power to keep warm. He took the role very seriously. His dedication to performing was that strong. Indeed, that was sufficient for the stage to seize him. Curtis enlisted in the Navy and served as a submariner during World War II before he had the chance to pursue a career. He received an honorable discharge from the military following the war. The first thing he eagerly got back into was acting, as you could expect. Even though acting was Curtis's one and only shot at a successful profession, he had no idea where to begin. Following a comedian he met in the Navy around and doing all he asked of him was all he needed to get his foot in the door. Actually, Curtis was almost his personal servant. Everything was done in the vain expectation that this comic with ties to Hollywood would impart some acting knowledge and, who knows, maybe even introduce him to some influential people. Drama class was a bust. The comic even went so far as to claim that Curtis lacked any acting chops whatsoever. In New York, Curtis enrolled in acting classes at the New School for Social Research after his unsuccessful attempts at teaching himself the craft at home. He was enrolled with several of his high school classmates. Joyce Selznick, a famous talent agent, casting director, and niece of film producer David O. Selznick, discovered Curtis while he was a college student playing. Curtis was cynical about his chances of making it big in Hollywood, even if she had faith in him. He felt this way maybe because not even his alma mater thought he was talented enough. "I was 1,000,000 to 1 shot, the least likely to succeed," Curtis felt he wasn't good enough. "I was not at the bottom of the hierarchy. I was bound to a bag while I lay beneath the totem pole in a sewer." He went so far as to say that he was first focused solely on money and girls. Even as he spoke, Curtis's greatest fear, returning to the Bronx and the poverty that had broken his family apart, was plainly visible. So, whether it was acting or going back to the Bronx, Curtis maintained acting regardless of the criticism he received. He was compelled to perform parts that required him to stand behind the stage background, pulling ropes, or, upon achieving his release, to take the stage himself. In his role-playing, he would use words he didn't know. He preferred that over going back home. He applied for the role of Tarzan at 20th Century Fox after failing to secure employment elsewhere. He was told to grow 8 inches before they would return after those folks took one glance at his height. I am really horrified. At long last, Curtis landed a role with an off-Broadway company, this time performing George Bernard Shaw's plays. An aspiring theatrical agent overheard Curtis talking about his potential and set up an interview between him and the chief of Eastern operations at Universal International Pictures. This persistence paid off for Curtis in the end because it was exactly where he was at his finest. Curtis secured his first stock contract with a film firm as a result of that encounter, so it must have gone satisfactorily. Curtis was presented with a suit and an actual ticket to Hollywood in the blink of an eye. Quite unexpectedly, he met Jack Warner entirely by coincidence on that flight to California. Some may see it as a sign that Curtis was destined for greatness, even though it didn't help him at the time. However, in order to achieve greatness, Curtis had to let go of a part of himself, such as his name. The fact that he was born Bernard Schwartz shows that he is Jewish. The difficulties of not having a memorable, American-sounding name were something that Curtis had to overcome. Now that he was on the cusp of a successful Hollywood career, he had to let rid of his birth name, among other things. After hearing about the name change from his debut film's director, Curtis settled on Anthony Adverse. However, the director wasted no time in reminding him that the name was already associated with someone in the business world. As a result, Anthony Curtis became a compromise for Curtis. He began his life in Hollywood as Anthony Curtis, living on a single mattress in his flat. Milk and pie were his only daily meals. Where did he stand? His weekly salary was a pitiful $43. Money wasn't the only thing that was holding him back. Despite the fact that Curtis wasn't acting stupid or foolish, he was abused and exploited due to his innocence. Something inside him kept telling him he wasn't good enough, so he was just willing to study as much as he could. And you might be thinking, well, at least he was attractive. Being attractive was like having a passport made out of discarded paper, as Curtis would tell you, in my hometown. But I was surrounded by 15 equally attractive men at Universal, and they were all waiting for me to break a leg. For him, Hollywood was the ultimate leveler. Even though he had a bad start to life, he felt he had no excuses because there were so many other people whose tails were moving as well. Curtis was on the verge of doing something he had vowed would never happen, and he was almost about to leave Hollywood altogether. Got back to the Bronx. While Curtis was waiting for the first eastbound train at Union Station, a studio press agent came up to him and spent some time encouraging him to keep going for his ambition. There are moments like this when Curtis would be eternally thankful. Something was going on behind the scenes as he returned to work. In his subsequent 3 films, he spoke less and less dialogue. The Hollywood stars were receiving fewer letters than Curtis. I was a movie magazine sensation, he recalled, but photographs always managed to get me out of jail. There were competitions as well. Challenged Tony Curtis to a week-long golf tournament. Out of nowhere, I became a prize. After a week of winning me over in Terre Haute, a woman told me I really wanted the gas burner upon our arrival. In the end, it paid off, as his 5th film became a smash hit. The mood at the film premiere altered when Curtis, the last person to enter the stage, made an appearance, even though the actors had been courteously applauded as they had entered the stage for the parade. Girls in the crowd, who made up the bulk of cinema magazine readers, were ecstatic to finally see Curtis in person after becoming accustomed to seeing him only on glossy photos. And they let their enthusiasm be heard by stamping their feet and yelling their hearts out. They were on the verge of making the entire meet and greet a riot. According to Curtis, it felt like stepping into a hot oven. Studio and cast members were taken aback. Their decision was understandable. On the whole, Curtis wasn't worth much. He was already struggling to get adequate screen time, let alone establish a following. Since his acting career was failing to generate enough income, the studio saw an opportunity to cash in by having him feature on the magazine. But there he was, about to be surrounded by fans. In their haste to recover from their shock, the studio began searching for a show that would feature Curtis as the lead. They succeeded. Their breakout role came in the film The Prince Who Came a Thief. Curtis was shown in all his manly splendor. Not to mention the plot wasn't overly complicated, which would have confused the target audience. A private dressing room was promptly assigned to Curtis. He was so well known that his film, which had cost around $200,000 to produce, made nearly $2 million at the box office. After years of obliviously missing the source of untold riches, the studio could hardly believe their good fortune at discovering it. They wasted little time in producing Curtis's film sequel once they witnessed the arrival of The Pots of Riches. The same was true for this, it was commercially successful. It was immediately obvious that audiences adored seeing Curtis in his many cinematic roles. Over the following several years, he firmly established himself as one of the emerging stars of his era by acting in a string of highly lucrative film projects. Yes. The next logical step for Curtis was to sign with Music Corporation of America, the most prominent talent agency in Hollywood. This is why he is referred to be a rising star. This was the official confirmation that he was finally a big deal in Hollywood. Although Curtis and his crew had been with Universal for 7 years, they felt there was room for advancement. His crew thought Curtis could mingle with Hollywood heavy hitters like James Dean, Burt Lancaster, and Kirk Douglas. They hit the ground running. Their efforts paid off when they found films that these large males could star in while still accommodating Curtis. In the years that followed, Curtis co-starred with Hollywood heavy hitters, sharing leading roles in a number of films. The famous actors and actresses, he claims, removed my burden off my shoulders. In my roles, I excelled. The guys were aware, but it didn't bother them because it allowed them to kick back and save their funds, knowing that the youngsters like me. Curtis landed his own big-budget film, The Defiant Ones, thanks to this ingenious plan, and he was nominated for an Oscar for his performance. Along with Marilyn Monroe, who was a global superstar at the time, he produced Some Like It Hot that same year. Commercially, the film was a smashing success. Tell me what you were hoping for. When Curtis starred in the film Operation Petticoat, which gave him the opportunity to return to the Navy, his career reached its pinnacle. In addition to his status as an accomplished actor and soldier. Comedies, tragedies, war films, Curtis was in them all. His employment brought him joy and he was quite versatile. Despite his lack of Academy Award hardware, he was elected into the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 1960 and received a star there. Additionally, he was bestowed the prestigious French Order des Arts et des Lettres. Despite his achievements, Curtis fearlessly stated, "But in a way I am still doing what I did when I was 7 or 8 years old, looking in the gutter for money. These days, though, neither the gutter nor the bank will do. Sight alone isn't enough." You would quickly come to comprehend the reason behind whatever melancholy you might have felt upon reading those lines. Janet Leigh was the object of Curtis's passion as he rose to fame. This was back when he was just starting out on the path to stardom that the ladies had flocked to him for. Back then, the studio had a firm grasp on how the film industry worked. Was aware that Curtis's budding career would be severely stunted if he dated any woman who got out. The studio spent 3 days trying to dissuade Curtis from getting married, despite their policy of staying out of their stars' personal lives. They told him he would be killing himself financially if he did. They then threatened to have him banished to the Bronx, putting a stop to his promising career, when that failed. But Curtis's love for Leigh led him to rebel against the studio bosses, elope to Greenwich, Connecticut, and be married by a local judge. The studio had anticipated that Curtis's marriage would hinder his career, but he actually took a giant jump forward after tying the knot. 2 children were born to the couple, Kelly and Jamie Lee. Curtis and Leigh did, however, end their marriage 10 years down the road. A 17-year-old German actress named Christine Kaufmann was allegedly Curtis's mistress. However, he clarified that there was another cause behind their divorce. He said that we were the Hollywood A-list for a spell. I excelled at what I did and was completely committed to Janet. However, the radiance began to fade from her eyes. Whatever I was, I knew it wasn't good enough for Janet. That was really painful and heartbreaking for me. After Curtis wed Kaufman, who was now 18 years old, just over a year after his divorce, fans who had previously supported him may have to rethink their position. He and Kaufman separated 4 years after that. It was around this time that Curtis's career began to plummet, and he began to associate only with liars and pigs. Natalie Wood was one of the famous people with whom Curtis had a high-profile romance despite his current situation. Following the failure of his first 2 marriages, Curtis wed 4 more times to different women. Curtis had a serious C** addiction and was also failing his marriage. He was even taken into custody at London's Heathrow Airport on suspicion of possessing marijuana. His star power dropped significantly because of this. He appeared in a number of low-profile films and TV shows, and he was offered very few film opportunities. This is a tragic development considering Curtis's stellar career peak. He finally reached a breaking point when he would no longer tolerate the downward spiral his life had descended into. Rehab became his next stop in 1982. He identified as a fine art painter upon his release from rehabilitation. It would be misleading to say that this was just a new pastime of Curtis's. He has always had a soft spot for art and even dabbled in it as a side hustle. It would appear to be the most logical choice to prioritize this following filmmaking. His works were of sufficient quality to be acquired by the prestigious New York City Metropolitan Museum of Art. Additionally, some were spotted at Carmel, California's Tony Vanderploeg Gallery. During this time, Curtis had a thriving career as an artist and also produced 2 autobiographies. 2 memoirs written by Tony Curtis, The Autobiography and American Prince. Everyone, from fans to those who weren't, praised Curtis for his remarkable strength. Everyone is aware of how tough it is for an addict to go to rehab and actually do it. Then, to recover from that and rebrand himself as a thriving artist and writer is an admirable feat. Curtis endured an ordeal no parent should ever face while undergoing this process of rebirth. The 23-year-old Nicholas, who was his kid from a previous marriage, passed away in Provincetown from an overdose of. Curtis claimed he was happy with his life and work, save for the fact that he longed for his beloved son, and added, "It is a tragic event when a parent loses his child." After his kid passed away, Curtis essentially disappeared from society, taking refuge on Cape Cod with his family. His last film, 2008's David and Fatima, was a musical version of Some Like It Hot, and he went on to tour with that. However, by this point, he was experiencing recurrent health problems of his own. Already in 1994, he had heart bypass surgery and fought chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, on and off. In 2006, he was in a coma for a long time after a near-fatal case of pneumonia. Sadly, 85-year-old Tony Curtis passed away on September 29, 2010, in Las Vegas, after suffering a heart arrest. When his wife said, "All Tony ever wanted to be was a movie star," she set many fans' minds at ease. Avoiding the spotlight as an actor was not his goal. Since he was a little boy, he dreamed of being a famous actor. In the face of insurmountable adversity, the young boy clung tenaciously to his one hope for a better future, and eventually emerged victorious. The admirers can only be thankful for the boy's resilience.